All right, gang, let's go ahead and get started. No time like the present, as I like to say. Michael, I totally see your hand raised, and we will be taking questions at the end of the webinar, and we will totally address your concerns then, I promise. But don't worry about it. We got you, man. We're in this. So welcome today to our Podbean 101 webinar. We're so happy to have everybody here. I promise we're going to have an amazing time. Before we begin, please make sure that your chat is set to all panelists and attendees and not just all panelists. We ask that you do this because during our webinar, my colleague John, who is currently in the chat, won't be able to see any of your questions or concerns to help you out unless your chat is set to all panelists and attendees. So that way, as we progress, if you have a question about something, he can totally help you out, but your chat has to be set properly first. But let's go ahead and get started. So welcome today to Podbean, a webinar brought to you by Podbean, the hosting company, because we are the cool ones. If you've never heard of Podbean before, Podbean is a podcast hosting company, which means this is where you upload your audio, so it could be then sent out to different directories such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the like. We've been hosting podcasts since 2006 with over 400,000 podcasts hosted with us and over 10 million podcast episodes. It is quite a milestone that we're so happy to hit, and we wouldn't be able to do it without podcasters like you. So we really appreciate you guys, for doing what you do and helping us be the best we can be so we can help you be the best you can be. We've also grown in other areas such as enterprise podcasting solutions for businesses, private podcasting for internal communications or for educational purposes, and our own podcast live streaming platform, which allows you to live stream in both a public and an unlisted format. So you can use it for remote recording, you can use it for patron rewards, you can basically use it for whatever solution you would like to apply the platform to. And if you have any further questions on that, we actually do have an entire webinar built around our live stream platform, so we can totally get you registered for that as well. If you've never met me before, hi, I'm Ronnie. I'm a podcast specialist here at Podbean, which means I know a little bit of everything that you need to know about podcasting. I do some of the social media stuff. If I'm not presenting a webinar, I'm usually hanging out in the chat, assisting with questions. If we ever get to go to a conference again, I'll be the one standing at the table handing out stickers, because that's easily my favorite part about the job, is just handing out stickers, because I really love stickers, guys. It's kind of a problem. And I'm here today to make sure that not only do you learn something about Podbean's interface, we have a good time while we do it. Because I know what it's like to sit through a really boring webinar and someone just kind of drones on and you don't really learn anything and you space off and doodle instead of taking notes. It's totally fine if you doodle and draw some pictures. I would love to see them. Please post them on Twitter so I can just go super excited over them. But do be aware that there is a test at the end of the webinar. So with our webinar, we do have a couple different goals that we would like to hit. First things first, there is no test. That was a joke. I try to keep things light, but I can't promise that the jokes get any better from here. So our main goal with this podcast is to get you familiar with Podbean's general interface. So we'll walk you through what it looks like to upload an episode, both as a draft and for future publication. We'll walk you through your social share options, which is quite a tongue twister if I can get my words out properly. We'll show you the different ways that you can lay out your own podcast website. We'll walk you through what your RSS feed is, what it's used for, and how you can adjust things within your feed, and where you can find your analytics and how you can interpret them to make them work for your podcast. With our webinar goals, we also have some webinar rules. So first things first, I ask that you guys, if you can, hold your questions until the end of the webinar. I will personally not answer any questions until the very end of the webinar, and I will be utilizing the Q&A section of our webinar software here. This is where John comes in. Everybody say hi to John and say thank you, John, because he's the one that is running the chat and he will be answering your questions there. So we all love John. He's a real one, so we appreciate him for all of his work. We've built in plenty of time to address questions, talk about concerns, and if necessary, I do include my email, so you can always reach out to me after the webinar. Our second rule is I ask that you guys stay as respectful as possible with each other in the chat and with me and John as, people of Podbean. I know sometimes new technology can be kind of frustrating. Maybe you have a question or a concern that we don't, directly address with this webinar. I promise we will do everything we can to help you along your podcasting journey, but we need everybody to contribute to a positive learning environment. And basically, if you can't keep the vibes chill, you have to bounce. That's just the rule. And finally, as you can probably guess, I tend to get very excited and I tend to talk a little quickly. I will do my best to kind of keep my pace more even, But if at any point I do kind of start to speed up, please let me know in the chat. And for resource purposes, we actually record all of our webinars. And once the webinar is over, we will be uploading it to YouTube as an unlisted video and sending out the link to everybody, so you will still have access to this content. But I still kind of want to keep my pace, as steady as possible, so you can still pay attention to it at a later date. All right, that's all the boring stuff. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the fun stuff. So first things first, I'm going to stop my share here. I'm going to share a brand new screen, which is this screen here. And everybody should be seeing a brand new screen that says Good Morning Podcast Tips and Tricks, because it is still technically morning for me. I don't know about you guys. All right, so you're probably very familiar with this screen already. This is one of the first screens that you see when you log into your Podbean account. As you can see, we already have some of our analytics listed, and we will be talking about all these fun, colorful boxes here in a bit. Don't worry about those numbers, because this is a test account and I don't actually publish anything beyond the same 23-second clip over and over. What we're actually going to do first is go over to our left-hand menu and go down to our settings, because we're going to input the most important information about your podcast. And that is your podcast title, your podcast description, the categories under which you podcast, and your podcast logo. Now, I know it might sound like I'm putting a lot of weight on these 4 things, but these are the first things that people are going to see when they check out your podcast. So these are the things that are going to work to draw people in so they want to listen to your content. Believe it or not, there's actually been studies that show that your podcast description is the #1 make or break thing that will make people want to listen to your content or make them want to pass over your show. So that's important information to be aware of. When it comes to your title, you have a max of 200 letters. You want to make it something that's clear, something concise, something that is not, a copy of another podcast, unless you're directly trying to reference that podcast. For example, we host a podcast called the Joe Rogan Experience, which is a podcast that breaks down the Joe Rogan experience. But beyond doing something that's referencing another podcast, you really don't want to copy another show. Also be aware you don't want to just stuff it with keywords or hashtags that you think people are going to be looking for, because Apple does keep an eye on shows that do that. And if they think you're trying to spam anything in your title or your description, they will actually mark you as spam and either remove you from the directory or refuse to have you listed in the directory. So when it comes to names, you don't want to make it too long and drawn out, because you want it to be something that rolls off the tongue a bit. But, this is your show. Make it something that is unique to your show. And I believe, whatever you choose is going to be really cool. I got you guys. With your description, we have a max again of 1,000 letters. Here you can talk about, if you have co-hosts, how often you update. Maybe if you're an interview-based show, if you're a talk show, if you're like a solo show, you can bring that information forward. We recently did an interview with a podcaster who said one of the best ways to beef up your description is to check out podcasts that are kind of in your same genre and figure out the way that they kind of word things and see if any of that is applicable to your show. And we'll link that interview for you guys to check out so you have more of an idea of how to work, search engine optimization for your podcast. Once again, though, be aware of keyword stuffing or hashtags, but you do want to make sure that it does describe your show, it does convey your tone, so people have an idea of what your content is going to be like. Down here, we have our categories. Thanks to some changes with the iTunes API a couple months ago, you now have three categories instead of 2. Your first category is going to be the main category under which you are listed, with your second and third categories being subcategories that kind of fine-tune that first initial category. You have a wide variety of categories to pick from. Just in this main category, we have arts, comedy, health and fitness, and each of those have their own subcategories just within this main category. So then you can even use these second and third ones to, branch out into other categories that you think are applicable. So my first category is TV and film history. My second category is news, and then my third one is true crime. These don't really apply because this is just a test podcast, and you do want to make sure that these are categories that work for your podcast, but it's a good way to get your show in areas that you think people will want to find your show. Down here, we have our podcast logo. There are some restrictions for this. You do need to make sure that it is at least 1400 by 1400 pixels with a maximum of 3000 by 3000 pixels in a JPEG or PNG format. Now, it's very important to note that when you are creating your logo and you are, exporting it so you can upload it here to Podbean, you don't have to export it at 100%. We have had some people who are creating their logos at that 1400 by 1400 mark, but they're saying that the file size is too big. If you export it at like 95% within your graphic design software, it'll still look, just fine, and the file size will be smaller and more acceptable. Your logo, it's totally up to you to design it however you would like. Our best suggestion is to make sure that it's as readable as possible, no matter how big or how small your logo is seen. So whether it's something that's up in the top corner of a page or something that's spread out over an entire page, people need to be able to recognize it. One of my favorite examples is actually the Welcome to Night Vale logo, simply because of the colors that they chose and the shapes that they chose, meaning that you can figure out what podcast it is, no matter how big or how small the icon is. So you can see that design element kind of within this logo here, because this is actually the logo for my personal podcast as an example, but you don't have to follow that same aesthetic. It's just better to keep in mind that you would like it to be recognizable no matter how big or how small it is. So these are the 4 most important parts, but we actually have more options that we can decide for our podcast in this screen with this More Options button. Now it's at this point that we can input our copyright year. This podcast was started in 2019, so 2019 is my copyright year. We can also decide our country of origin. So if you're doing a podcast that has a bent to a particular location, like you're covering crocheting techniques in Russia, or you're covering farming in Peru, you can actually use this to pick that particular country so it is marketed more towards that particular country. If it's something that's more global, something that's more evergreen for everybody no matter what location, you can just keep it as global to make sure that it's pushed to everybody in an equal amount. Further down, we can decide our episode order if we would like it to be new to old or old to new. This is good to have if you have a specific listening order that you want people to listen to your content in, such as, like a fiction-based podcast or something that's got a more educational bent to it. And then down here, we can pick out our time zone. So as we can see, I'm in the central time zone because I'm just cool like that. But then we also have the GMT time zone listed. This is important because as we get to our analytics screen, we will have some of our analytics listed in GMT, and this will let us know what that looks like compared to our own time. So then we can make adjustments as necessary. Now, I don't think I have changed anything, but I'm going to go ahead and click Update Options. And everything has officially been saved. So we're going to go ahead and go up and talk about publishing real quick. I know we said that we would talk about our podcast feed and you would think we would just jump right there real quick, but believe it or not, you actually have to have at least a couple episodes live in your feed before you can send it out to be, listed in directories such as for Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the like. If you don't have like an episode live, then your feed will not be accepted, and it does have to be something that's live that people can listen to. So we're going to go ahead and click Publish. And by clicking Publish, we actually have 2 submenus. We have our Episodes menu, where we can upload our audio or our video podcast. And we have Media Manager. And we're going to go ahead and dip into that for just a moment, because this is actually where you can upload pictures that you can utilize for your podcast show notes and for your podcast website. So I'm going to go ahead and click this blue Upload button up here in the right corner. And this will let me pick out a new image that we can have listed on our site. So I'm going to go ahead and I believe I have a good picture of my kitty cat that we're going to utilize. If not, we'll just use we'll use this fun picture. I can't wait for you guys to see it. Yes, it's a picture of Mothman. So now I have this image listed here in my Media Manager, so I can then utilize it for my show notes and for my podcast website. So let's go ahead and go up to our episodes screen here. And we're going to go ahead and upload a new episode. I have quite a variety of episodes listed here. As you can see, they are all published and they are all live. You might be curious about what these green locks mean. These actually mean that these are part of my premium program, and if you have any questions on that, please feel free to reach out to us and come check out our monetization webinar so you can learn more about our premium program. But we're going to go ahead and go up to this blue button here that says New Episode and talk about uploading a brand new podcast episode. So at this point, we can choose a new file that we can upload, and we actually have a wide variety of file types that we can use. And I actually wrote them down so I don't get them confused. You can upload an MP3, an MP4, an M4A, an M4V, a .mov file, or a PDF. So these are all file types that you can upload to Podbean to utilize for your podcast. Do be aware that some directories such as Spotify will only accept an MP3 file. And if you are not on the unlimited plus tier that will let you upload video podcast, you cannot upload a video file. There are ways that you can work around that, so you have a video podcast to push to YouTube or to Facebook, and we will be talking about that here in just a minute. So I'm going to go ahead and upload a new file. I have something on my desktop just for you guys. Here we go, my cool new episode. So when you upload an episode, if your file name happens to have spaces in it, it will let you know that it's changing the file name to not include the spaces. It's just changing the name. It's not changing the content of the file. It's not converting the file to a different file type. It's staying the same way that we have uploaded it. It's just changing the name in the back end. So we'll go ahead and click yes there to let them know that I'm fine with it changing. This is uploading very quickly because, once again, I said this is a 23-second episode. It might take a minute to upload, episodes that are, 15, 20, 30 minutes, anything like that. But if you find that it's taking too long, please reach out to us so we can make sure that it's nothing in the back end. I'm going to go ahead and include a title. Say, wow, a cool new title for my webinar bros. Our description will say, check out our new episode, smiley face. And we can go ahead and either publish this, we can save it as a draft, or we can publish it at a later date. I'm going to go ahead and save this episode as a draft. And now we currently have this episode listed with the rest of our episodes, but as we can see, the status is grayed out because it is not currently live and it is not, you cannot listen to it yet. So if we want to change that, all we'd have to do is go over to this right-hand little submenu and click the pencil icon that will let us update the episode. So it brings us right back to where we were. All of the information that we left behind is still here. So at this point, we can do anything like adding pictures to our description. If you are part of any kind of monetization plan that includes advertising, such as our ads marketplace or our pod ads program, you can also set your ad time slot. We can go even further down to more episode settings, such as putting in a season number or an episode number if those are applicable. We can mark this episode as clean or explicit. We can mark it as a full episode, a trailer episode, or a bonus episode. And we can go even further into including a different summary that would be listed in specific directories as opposed to this main summary here. Now, before we click publish, before we decide to do anything with this, we can also go even further over here on the right with our social share options. So when these buttons are highlighted, that means that we have logged into these platforms through our Podbean account. And when we push our episode and it is live and people can listen to it, it will also push content out to these platforms as well. For places like Twitter and LinkedIn, it will push as a specific blurb that we can customize as well as a link to our content. For places like WordPress, it will push with our podcast show notes as well as a link to our content. Tumblr, we are actually experiencing some difficulties with that right now, so if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us through our support team so we can help you out with that. And then most importantly, through sites like Facebook or YouTube, you can actually push it as a video. It will be a video with a static background image of your podcast logo with your audio playing over it, but it does allow you to utilize these platforms so you can reach out to a wider audience with a different way that they can experience your content. Now, it is important to note that there are some API limitations, especially with YouTube. You do have to be on a paid tier in order to access this feature. And if you're on the unlimited audio tier, you can push one episode to YouTube every 7 days. And if you're on the unlimited plus tier, you can upload to YouTube once every 24 hours. Now with Facebook, it will actually push as a Facebook video, not as a YouTube video, which is really great because Facebook tends to promote their own internal video player more than they like to promote YouTube videos. So you can make sure that you're using this platform to the best of its ability. So as you can see, I currently have Twitter and YouTube highlighted, meaning that once I publish this episode, it will push to these platforms. If I wanted to change that, all I would have to do is click on the icon again and it will not be highlighted. And if I wanted to sign into any of these platforms, I can either do that here, or I can do that on our social share screen, which I will show you here in just a moment. So I think everything is cool. I like this podcast episode as it is. So I'm going to go ahead and click publish now. So now our episode is live. We once again have the option to share this content, right now across other platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. We have a wide variety of platforms that you can utilize, and you can just email or copy the URL to share with people, through other means. You also have the option to have a customizable HTML5 player for your website. So for this one, it does just go by one single episode, but we do have another player that will list multiple episodes. So if you have a static web page, that would probably be the best one. But if you have like a blog or a website that you update with every new episode, you can have this little HTML5 player. So it will have your content right there for people to listen to without having to be redirected by any kind of link. So we have a rectangle one here. We also have a square one, which is cool. I prefer the rectangle one because we have some more colors to play with. Now I'm just the teensiest bit colorblind, so I'm going to pick some good colors. There we go. So we have the option to have a share button. We can change the font. We can have a download option for people just to download straight from the HTML5 player. And we can change the text to be right to left if we so choose. So like I said, this is just for one single episode. If we would like to make one that has multiple episodes, we're going to scroll up a bit. We're going to go back to our left-hand menu, and we're once again going to go into our settings tab. Once again, we are back in our general options. We're going to skip down past the feed and click on the embeddable player. And here is where we have our HTML5 player that we can customize to have multiple episodes. So I'm going to go ahead and change some colors here, make it look pretty. The colors that you choose can be, reflective of your podcast, whatever aesthetic you want to go for. I just pick some colors because they're easier for me to see. We once again have the option to have a share button so people can, share straight from the player. We can change the font. We can have people download straight from the player. We can once again change the text to be right to left, and we can change how many episodes we would like listed. I'm going to go ahead and put 6 instead, and we'll go ahead and click preview and get code. All right, so you guys ready to see what I made? Yeah, look at that. So pretty. So as we can see, I have all 6 of my episodes listed here. You can have however many episodes you would like listed. So once again, if you have a static blog page or a static website page, you can have this on the front, and people can have a wide variety of content from you to listen to before they can dive into, any links that, redirect them to further episodes. So right below our embeddable player, we're going to go ahead and talk about our social share options. So once again, we have the option to connect to Facebook, Twitter, WordPress, Tumblr, YouTube, LinkedIn, and you can also connect to Spotify through here. You will automatically be listed in Spotify's directory once you hit about 5 episodes, but if you want to speed that up at any point, you can always connect to Spotify through here. And once again, we are experiencing some technical difficulty with Tumblr, so if you have any questions about that, please reach out to us. So once you are connected to one of these platforms, some of these platforms will let you customize any kind of blurb or phrase that gets sent out with your content. So such as the case with my Twitter account, I can customize any kind of blurb that is sent out when a link to my content is sent out. So by clicking the pencil icon, I'll get a little window that will let me type a new message. Mine currently says, "Hey friends, my new episode is out," but I can change it to say, "Check out my latest episode," smiley face. And this is something that you can change before you publish each episode, so each blurb is its own custom thing, or it can be something that you set that is available for all of your episodes. We say that this is a great way to be aware of your own personal bandwidth, how much energy you can expend on your podcasting and on your social media, and take best advantage of the platforms that you can utilize. So now that we've talked about our social share options, we're actually going to go back up and we're going to talk about how you can lay out your podcast website. So every podcaster, no matter what tier they are on, they will have access to their own podcast website, and it will be yourpodcastname.podbean.com. There will be, if you're on the free tier, you will have access to this front row theme as well as our themes down here, and you'll have a couple customization options. If you're on the unlimited audio tier, you have access to our pro themes, and you have a couple more customization options that you can utilize. And then if you're on the unlimited plus tier, you have access to all of the themes, and you can actually go in and customize the CSS coding for any of these themes. Now, John in the chat actually does something really cool with his site. He does some really cool coding stuff. It looks very nice. I don't know how to code. I'm terrified of code, so I'm never going to do it. I will show you what that screen looks like, but I can't walk you through anything because that is not my expertise. There's way too many numbers, and I'm an English major, guys. You can't expect me to know numbers. So I currently have our front row theme enabled, and we're going to go ahead and change some of our theme settings by clicking this button here. So we can include a header image, and if we hover over this little blue question mark, it'll let us know that the recommended size is 1600 by 400 pixels. We can include a background image that will tile itself. We can change our theme colors here. We can change the font size. We can change the font itself, and we can change the color for the audio and video player. I'm gonna go ahead and change my font size to 20 because my eyes are really not having a good time right now. We'll go ahead and click submit. And we also have more options that we can choose from, such as having our download stats shown on the page. We can make sure that there is an episode download link for anybody who's interested. And we can dictate how many episodes we would like to be listed on this page. I'm gonna go ahead and change this from 15 to 20, and we'll go ahead and click submit. So now our theme has updated once again, and we'll go ahead and click view site so we can check it out. So this is the custom banner that I made just in, I actually made it in Microsoft Paint. We can see my stats are listed. We can see all of my episodes here. We can see the premium episodes that you need to subscribe to check out. And as we go further down, we actually have an example of how much you can include in your podcast show notes. I literally just went to our Podbean blog and copy and pasted like 2 or 3 different posts all at once and included it in the show notes to show you what you can include. So you can do things like images, you can actually include links. So any of that information you can include in your podcast show notes if you are on a paid tier. So with our page, you might be wondering, is there anything else that I can customize? And there is. You can actually include sidebar widgets for this theme, which would go here and over here. And you can include podcast pages. So we're going to go back to our themes tab here. And as you can see below the themes menu, we have the option to include the widgets and the pages. So we'll go ahead and click widgets first. You can include things like any custom links. And if we want to do that, all we have to do is click it and drag it over. We can include a search bar. We'll click that and drag that over. We can show podcasts that we follow, podcasts that follow us, and we can also include custom text. And for this theme, we're going to go ahead and include the links to our pages. So some of these widgets you can customize, such as our custom links here by clicking this little gear icon. A new window will pop up, and especially for this box, this is where you can include links to any of your social media accounts. If you have a YouTube channel, if you're on Twitter or Facebook, anything like that, you can include that link here so that people can discover you on these platforms. Having something like this available turns your podcast page into more of a landing page for you and all of your content. So this is a way that you can make sure people can find you if they check out this page. They can find you no matter where else you are listed on the internet. Now, when it comes to including custom links, you do want to make sure that you have the beginning part, the HTTPS part included to make sure that the link redirects correctly. We'll go ahead and click save here. We can also include custom text. So currently my custom text says, "Hi friends, welcome to my page." And if we have premium content, if you want to include your archives, anything like that, all you have to do is click the widget and drag it over. So now that I have all my widgets, I'm going to go ahead and click Save Changes. And now if we go back to our podcast tips and tricks page and refresh it, it should have all of our widgets listed. So we have my links here, I have my custom text, and I have pages here, even though I currently don't have any pages active. If we want to include pages, we can go back to this screen here, go below the sidebar widgets menu to the pages menu, and we can include a new page. And to do that, we're going to go up here to the right-hand corner and click Create a New Page. And here we can add some cool new text, smiley face, say check out my page, smiley face. And we can do things like including links, and we can also include images, which is where the image that we uploaded in our media manager will come into play. So by clicking the image button, it'll bring up a new window that will give us the option to choose from an image list, and these will be all the images that we uploaded in our media manager. So I included a picture of Mothman because I like Mothman, he's a cool dude. And now that I have my picture and my text, I can go down here and click publish, and this page will now be live for people to look at. So all I have to do is click on the link and it will take us to this page. Let's say check out my page, we have my picture of Mothman, and all is well. And we even have my page listed over here in the sidebar widget. So if we go back to this page, right below pages, we see the option to edit our CSS. Clicking on that just takes us to some CSS editor. Like I said, I have no idea how to change this, so I can't walk you through anything like that. So now that we have talked about our layout, we are going to go down to our settings, and we're going to go ahead and talk about your RSS feed. So clicking on settings takes us back to our general page once again, and we'll click on feed, and this will take us to a place where we can actually change things within our RSS feed. So you're probably very familiar with this already. This is your RSS feed URL. Clicking on this takes us to a huge page that is nothing but code, but that code essentially is your podcast. And this is what you send to different directories. So they have that information to list in the directory. And through this URL, you receive information back in the form of your analytics. So first things first, we can include a podcast subtitle and a podcast summary. Your summary can be different from the summary that was in your original settings, or it can be the same. It just depends on your taste. Your podcast subtitle will allow you to expand a bit more on your podcast title without going so far as you would with your summary. Here you will be listed as the author/owner. It will be your name that you have for your podcast, your Podbean username, which is going to be that same name that's up here in the corner. Then you have to include a contact email. Now this is very important. You do want to make sure that it's an email that you utilize, something that is not just the sample email that's included, because otherwise your feed might not be accepted. I learned this the hard way after about a week and a half of wondering why my podcast wasn't being accepted into a directory. So do make sure that you have a current email here. And then we can mark if our entire podcast is explicit or clean. Now we saw that we could do this per episode, but this is where you would mark it for the overall nature of your podcast, whereas doing it per episode will basically show if there's an exemption to this rule. So if you know your entire podcast is going to be clean, you can mark it here. And then if you have an episode where somebody drops a bad word, you can mark individual episodes as explicit. And the inverse is true. If you know that your entire podcast is going to be explicit, you can mark that here. And then you can mark individual episodes as clean. Then we have the option to mark our podcast as episodic or serial. Now, if your podcast is episodic, this is something that does not have a set listening order. This is something that just continuously updates. Your listeners can dip in at any point and still kind of know what's going on. Whereas a serialized podcast is something that's going to have a very specific listening order. Maybe it's separated into seasons. This is great if, once again, if you have like a fiction-based podcast or anything like that, you can mark it as serialized so people know that there is a specific listening order. Finally, we have our language here. So if you're podcasting mostly in German or Russian or Spanish, anything like that, you can mark your language here. Mine is primarily in English, so I kept mine as English. We also have some advanced feed settings. And by clicking this arrow, we can include if there's a limit of episodes that we would like listed in any directory. And we can mark if this is a feed that has another feed coming into it. So if you're switching over to Podbean from another hosting site, you would mark this to let your Podbean feed know that there is another feed that is feeding into it. So that way all of your information comes over and you don't have to worry about losing anything. So I don't believe I changed anything, but I'm going to go ahead and click Update Options anyways, just to make sure everything is okay. So if you find that you have gone through and you have filled out all the information for your RSS feed, but it's still not being accepted by any directory, please reach out to our support team so we can go in and make sure that there's nothing weird going on in the back end, and we can make sure that your feed is, overall okay. So now that we've talked about your feed, we're going to jump up and talk about your podcast statistics. So once again, we have our nice colorful boxes. These show us our downloads for yesterday, our downloads for the last 7 days, the last 30 days, and for all time. Don't be frightened of these numbers. Once again, this is just a test podcast. I upload the same episode every single week. These numbers don't hurt my feelings. So automatically we will see a graph that shows us what our downloads look like for the current month. Even though our month is just 8 days long, it will show us the downloads for these 8 days. I can change this to be all of June, all of May, the last 3 months, the last 12 months, and the last 24 months. I'm going to go ahead and set this for the last 12 months just because that's the best graph. And it shows us what our downloads look like over the 12 months. So as we can see, I got a whopping 26 downloads and I went up 160%, which is super great. If I wanted to see how much I've gone down since, May, I can click on May and it will show me that I got 2 downloads and I went up 0% because I believe I had no downloads beforehand. We're going to keep it on the last 12 months though, just for the sake of our next graph, which breaks down the downloads from that time period into where our audience is located. So this gives you an idea of where the biggest chunk of your audience is going to lie so you can best target them. We break this down by country, and then for specific countries such as the US, Canada, and Australia, we'll break it down by state or province. So in the US, I'm very popular in Nebraska, which I would hope so because I live there. In Canada, I'm very popular in British Columbia. What's up, British Columbia? And then in Australia, I'm not popular anywhere, but that's totally fine. Australia, we're still cool. But like I said, this gives you an idea of where your audience is. So if you're trying to target the biggest, chunk, you know that for this particular podcast, I would try to target the US first, and then I would try to target Canada. If your biggest audience is in Brazil, you would try to target Brazil. Just gives you an idea of what your audience looks like. Down here, we can see our downloads by time of day. And this is easily one of the most important graphs. We actually have a whole article on this particular graph and how you can utilize it to make sure that you are making the best use of your audience's activity. So this shows you the time of day that you are getting most of your downloads and the day of the week. So with this graph, it says that I am most active on Wednesday at 6 p.m. That's when I got 7 downloads. This is listed in GMT. So with our general settings, it shows you what GMT looks like compared to your own time zone. So we can make adjustments as necessary. But this shows you when your audience is active. And by doing so, this shows that I can publish on Wednesday and I can make the best use of when my audience is most listening. And this makes sure that I'm getting the most attention for my podcast within the first 24 hours of when I'm uploading it, which gives more of them a chance to talk to each other. Maybe they're talking more about it on social media and whatnot. I want to make sure that I'm making the most of that momentum. Over to the side, we have our user agents, and this is basically how they're listening to your podcast. So I see that I have a wide audience listening through Chrome, and then the next biggest chunk is through Firefox, which shows me that most of my audience is listening through their browser. If you're seeing stuff like the Podbean app or through other, podcasting apps, you know that most of your listeners are listening while on the go or while they're commuting, anything like that. So you have an idea of what they're doing while they're listening to your content. Down here, we have our top 10 episodes. We can see that my really cool new episode that I published on St. Patrick's Day actually got the most attention. Over to the side here, we have our user retention. And this shows you the percentage of your audience that has returned after, the week previous. This is through just the Podbean app. So if you're not seeing a huge amount here, don't worry about it. It's just through the Podbean app. But this shows if you have a large audience that is listening for the first time, or if you have a smaller, more dedicated audience that's coming and listening over and over. And then below that, we have our daily listeners, and it breaks down how many listeners you have per day during a certain period of time. So right now, this is just going for the last 30 days. I can change this to go even further, but I don't have a whole lot of listeners, so we're just going to keep this the last 30 days. But it gives you an idea of what your listenership will look like compared to your downloads. And so these are our stats, and I believe that that means we have hit the end of the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my share here. I'm going to share my PowerPoint once more. Get my chat back up, make sure I see everybody okay. So first things first, this screen will show you what is available on our first 3 tiers, our basic tier, our unlimited audio tier, and our unlimited plus tier. We do have business tiers and enterprise tiers for those that are looking to podcast for their business or their company or anything like that. But at this point, it has the same things as our unlimited plus tier. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to reach out to us. This QR code here will take you to our webinar page that will show you the other webinars that we offer. We are just about to launch into our webinar on how to record your podcast. We have one coming up on how to promote your podcast. We have a wide variety of webinars for every single thing that you could, want from your podcast. And if we don't have a webinar on it, please reach out to us because we'll probably get one going soon anyways. We got you guys. And then finally, this QR code will take you to a walkthrough that will show you how to submit your podcast to at least a dozen of the bigger directories to make sure that your podcast is as widespread as possible. And this QR code will take you to our YouTube channel that has other video walkthroughs for a lot of our features. You can always reach out to our support team here at support@podbean.com. And you can find us on Twitter and Facebook at podbean.com. And you can find me on Twitter at podbeanronnie. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and check our Q&A section. Let me grab a drink first. All right, so let's go ahead and check out our questions. All right, so Sean says, I would like to understand the differences in the packages and understand how crucial the differences are in packages and what to think about as we grow the podcast. So Sean, when it comes to the different things that we offer with our tiers, that was that image that I showed you previously, and that's actually available on our, main page, podbean.com. There's pricing listed there, and it breaks down the different things that are offered with our different tiers. All right. So Mary says, I have the Podbean app, but how do I record a podcast while interviewing someone on the phone I am using? Our best solution for that is actually our podcast live streaming platform. You can utilize the Podbean app and speak live, and then have your person that you want to interview, your co-host, your guest, or anybody like that. They can call in into the live stream, and you can interview them within the live stream. You can either do it live, or you can have your live stream be unlisted and just send them a link, so that's the only way that they can get into the live stream. So you can just use it to remotely record your interview. So Mark says, to get my podcast on all the social media platforms, do I need to have an account set up with them first? Yes, you should have an account with any platform that you want to try to promote on, just so you can make sure that, nothing is being posted without your consent. And so you can, be more interactive and build up the momentum of your podcast and your content. All right, I'm going to answer 2 more questions and then we're going to call it here. So Sean asks, can we get a recording of this? I'm not including this in my 2 questions. We are recording this webinar, and you will be sent a link to this webinar, so you will still have access to this content. So Zach says, will Podbean also count plays or downloads from sites that are linked to my RSS feed like the Facebook player or Spotify? So that's what your RSS feed is for. When you send it out for directories to have the information to list your content, you receive information back from them in the form of your analytics. So anything that is using your RSS feed will give you any kind of metrics, downloads, plays, anything like that. I believe that through the Facebook social share, because it's not using your RSS feed, you do not get analytics from that. But if you are using your Facebook account, you should still be able to go in and, check out how many people are interacting with that content. And yes, we do bring in analytics from Spotify because they do access your RSS feed. All right, Shauna says, can I have multiple podcasts per package? So we have, with the basic, the unlimited audio, and the unlimited plus tier, you can have just one podcast. Once you start getting up to our business tiers, you do have access to the ability to have multiple podcasting channels. And if you have any questions on a package like that, please reach out to us so we can discuss further of what the pricing on that will look like. All right. So last question, Paul, you said, how do you publish on Apple Podcasts? scanning this QR code here will take you to our master post on how to get your podcast on Apple Podcasts. We have both a text walkthrough and a video walkthrough to show you that process. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here. If I did not get to your question, please feel free to email me, and I will include my email here in the chat just so you can reach out and I will help you there. If I can spell my own name, goodness gracious. There we go. So please feel free to email me there. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming into this webinar. This has been a great time. Everybody say thank you to John for running the chat, because I know that he's been doing so much work answering your questions as we progress through this webinar. Once again, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Please, tell us about your podcast on Twitter, because we love to hear about it. And everybody, take care, have a fantastic day, and happy podcasting.